Hi, my name is Kim Pflueger. Like you said, I'm the Senior Director of Product and Lifecycle Marketing at Splice. I'm going to talk to you about a few things today related to persona and customer-based insights in your organization. And we're going to start with why it's important to create a shared vocabulary in your org and what that looks like, and how we leverage those internal experts, that we know we have. Getting the buy-in. We've talked about this in various aspects today, that alignment and buy-in is really important, but why is it so elusive sometimes? And looking at rolling out our personas or our customer segments, or however you want to package your customer insights and what that means. A little bit about me and why I feel even semi-qualified to talk to you about this today. I've been very, very lucky to work at a couple of very customer-centric organizations, or organizations that have decided to become customer-centric. If this were my persona bio, you would see that one of my pain points is really making really big bets and investments without having the insight. This is a really fancy way of saying that I'm risk averse. That threads throughout my life, but we can talk about that in a different session. But what this really means is that I'm typically the person in an organization that will pull together market or customer insights. So it's been a really good fit for PMM. So I'm going to share some of the insights from those projects with you today. This is sort of the magic. It's not really an equation. It's just sort of basic math. But there's two important things that we need to think about when we're creating a shared language about our customers internally. And it's the way that you talk about customers, the categories and sort of the taxonomy around customers, and then the behaviors that sort of shape the hypothesis you have about them. And a big personas project is really a good way of pushing folks to kind of move towards a more customer-centric way of thinking. And in order for that to be clear in your org, sort of both of these things need to exist. So let's get into why. So on the taxonomy, it comes up a lot. Hear this as sort of disagreement in your organization, or if you've ever been in a conversation where you sit at a table with somebody and you're trying to figure something out, and you say, well, I think it's this person. I think that this customer has this problem. And you hear product say something else, and you hear data team say something else. And you're arguing about the type of customer rather than the problem that they actually have. And this is usually because you don't have really good delineations and buckets of things to talk about. And the way you talk about your customers is as important as the categories of customers you talk about. And really, to just say this more simply, is that personas are not customer segments, segments are not users, and users are not the third one. So you likely know this intuitively, being product marketers, customer-focused and problem-focused. But let's walk through an example just real quick. And this can really help your organization kind of just frame the thinking around the conversation before you get into behaviors and pain points and frustrations, because it can get really mixed up with behavior in product or behavior in the market. And you really want to start with segments. So this is sort of how we do this at Splice. It's more or less pretty consistent in organizations that I've been through. But this is your lens for market focus. So they allow you to really properly carve up the market, and it's really more from the standpoint of your business strategy. And it creates focus there, which kind of casts it's sort of almost the top of your funnel in terms of how you're talking about customers. And we did end up doing personas first. And it's not necessarily the wrong way to do it, but we had to go back and realize that, we actually have to do a customer segment project, which then in turn kicked off a personas edit. So really get this right first, really look at your market data, and really make your best guess as to what you want your core market segment to be, because you can carve personas from that. So you layer these in later. And what I love about this is that it's your lens for user needs and problems, and it's observed in qualitative data. This is the data you really can't get anywhere else other than by talking to people. And this is where your pain points and frustrations come from. So for example, at Splice, we talk about music producers a lot. It's a key segment within the music market. And we know that there's a core section of personas within that market segment that's our professional segment. And they have the need for speed, oddly enough. But if we talk about that in the context of everybody that makes audio everywhere, it gets really overwhelming really quickly. And it can spin off this sort of never-ending rabbit hole of conversation around, well, what about this segment that needs efficiency? And what about this segment that needs efficiency? And what about this segment that needs efficiency? Focus, and then layer, and then get specific about your users. So this is what you can actually observe in your product data. This allows you to be really crisp about the behavior that's actually going on that you can observe. So this is your quantitative behavioral data, if you will. So an example of this might be you're going to further refine maybe you're working on marketing to a user that has that need, but they're a registered user who's performed a key action in your platform in the last 90 days. So you can use these lenses to create a taxonomy that can be really helpful to shortcut conversations. And this is where your shared vocabulary starts to kick in. So if we look back at personas for a second, we'll dive into how we create these. And this is where psychographic data and talking to people is really, really, really important. These two people are not the same people. I know a lot of us have probably seen this. Suppose this should say King Charles. But this is exactly why we need personas. And this was sent to me by quite a few people. I apologize, I don't know the source of this, so if anybody knows, I would love to know so I could properly credit. But psychographics tell a deeper story about these people and why we need to make things for them. It's the layer of customer understanding that we can't observe in data that we have immediate access to. And we really have to go out and talk to people. We have to prioritize that. We have a lot of time that we spend internally talking about users with never having talked to them. So we can't really know what they want until we actually front load that and make that the priority. And it seems like a big time investment up front. I actually had this conversation with a few people earlier when we were doing the roundtables. And it really helps make the depth of conversation later more impactful. You're going to spend the same amount of time overall doing the thing, but the end result becomes better because you have the customer insights to push you forward. So if you're not used to being a customer-centric organization or you have trouble communicating around customers, a persona project, even on a small scale, is a really good opportunity to kind of kickstart that customer-centric behavior and for you to be the facilitator of that, if your org does not do this already. So let's talk about buy-in. I'm going to go through a bit about how we sort of architected this in our latest project, but if you think about this as something you have to do, right, you're like, I have to get buy-in. I need to make sure we report this out. You'll probably fail before you start. And I know a lot of us are very familiar with this concept. A lot of us work on product launches, this is also a key component. But it's worth just sort of noting separately that if this is a process of understanding people, we have to include all of the people. We have internal stakeholders just as much as we have external people we need to talk to. And the more people you include, the easier this becomes. And you will have certain steps where, yes, you do need to go and report out and get your flag planted so that you can say, like, we've reached a milestone in this project. But at that point, it should really be a formality. So I can talk about a way that I've had success with this in the past, and maybe you will too. This is the first piece of this. This was instrumental in helping us get personas to stick at a couple different organizations. And this is different than internal experts. We'll talk about internal experts in a second, but we built a team of internal delegates. John Cotter writes about this in his book, Leading Change, if you're familiar with that, which is it's step 2 of an 8-step process on leading effective change in an organization. And really, when you're trying to talk about customers more and you're really trying to push that into the work that you do, it really is an org change. It's a mindset shift. It's something you have to hold each other accountable to. So having a core group of people that you can use to shepherd that work along and be ambassadors for that work is incredibly important. Internal delegates end up being the stakeholders of that work and eventually your internal customers of the work as well. So they get sort of a firsthand participation in the work, and they can provide guidance and insight along the way while also being able to carry the work forward and develop it further. So this is what this looked like at Splice. This was 11 people across product, data, design, marketing, customer care, basically anybody that raised their hand and said, I care about customers, and I think we need to use it more in the work that we do here. So with these key partners, we kind of chartered, we interviewed each other, we interviewed the organization, we researched, we reported, we got feedback. We continued to do this throughout a few months. And this group of people was blind of title or rank. It was really just anybody who was interested, including one person who was in the program management function with a musicology degree. and some functional leadership experts. And we said yes to everybody. And that probably sounds really scary, because usually with large-scale cross-functional projects, keeping it small and tight is really helpful. But in this particular case, if you take the time to stop and talk to somebody who's excited about the work that you're doing, if you're trying to create ambassadors and a change in the organization, that moment can turn somebody into a promoter. So this will be a theme in this talk. And I should note too, we're about a 200-person company. So depending on your size organization, this may or may not scale. And leveraging our internal experts was a key piece of this. So we have many, many, many internal experts at Splice. Because it's a music company and our core customer segment is music producers, we have a lot of former customers, existing customers, people who make music every day, including myself. And we felt really strongly that a lot of these folks needed to be included in talking about customer data and how we were going to use it internally. And this is somewhat controversial. I know there's probably some people in this room like shaking their head like you shouldn't be talking to people inside the building making personas. And the truth is really, it's how you use the information. It's not the fact that you're leveraging internal experts. And when you think about it from a buy-in standpoint, they're immensely important because they have their own influence within the organization. And unless you're all speaking the same way about the same user problems and needs of customers, you can get off track pretty quickly. So I think looking at them from the lens of where they shape the way that you think about the market and the way that you think about your competitors, it can kind of shortcut some of the research process. Not introducing bias necessarily, but being aware of where your biases are and checking them, and being able to get everybody to the same level of understanding before you go out and do a bunch of user interviews. So they were an immensely important part of the process for us. And this is sort of what they end up doing for you when you get to the point where you're shaping your overall understanding. You get your market and your competition awareness. You understand your gaps in org knowledge and the gaps in your product. You can build customer hypotheses, where when we talk about hypotheses, which we'll talk about in a second again, hypotheses is like that group of user behaviors and understanding that eventually gets molded into personas. But there's a bunch of awesome places to start that these folks can really help you get to, where it would ordinarily take months. They've spent their 10,000 hours doing this work. We can sort of leverage that to help you build the interview script to go out and talk to people and make sure that you're asking the right questions. So just like you wouldn't send a survey to only one cohort and claim that it represents the whole market, you wouldn't just use these internal experts. You're using them with the understanding that you're going to go out and validate a lot of what they've said. And lastly, from their standpoint, if you think about being an internal expert yourself, if you think about something that you're really, really, really good at, and somebody doesn't give you a chance to weigh in, or you're at, you think of any hobby that you're at, and you're at a party, and somebody comes up and talks to you nonstop about the thing that you're great at, and you don't get a chance to share. It can feel really patronizing, and people can actively detract from, or you can actively detract from the conversation. So if you've listened to them, you've asked for their opinion, you've incorporated their point of view, and supported their work, and acknowledged how they've been a part of the project, your coalition ends up growing because you've actually activated these people within your organization. So when we look at the hypothesis part of this, so we talked about the taxonomy. We've worked our way all the way through building the coalition inside your organization, and now it's time to actually go out and talk to people. This can look different depending on your organization. But let's talk about how this tactically went for Splice. And this can be a pretty big research effort. But remember, there's 11 people, at least in this particular case, working on this. So the first being the kickoff workshop. We just held an open session about what people wanted to understand about customers and how they felt they could better do their work if they had specific insights. We collected all of that information and also asked people whether or not they would like to be involved. And then we did about 10 focus groups with different departments. Again, departments that raised their hand and said, I need this data. Conducted 40 internal interviews at a 200-ish person company, which was, again, both leveraging internal experts, but also identifying key stakeholders, talking to executives, getting that key buy-in, and then taking that externally. So up until this orange block, we're kind of mulling over what we want in the script so that we can have really good conversations with the limited people we have time to talk to for the beginning part of this effort. And if this isn't an expertise that you have in-house, it's completely okay. You could leverage your design team or just jump in the pool. There's no wrong way. Well, I think some UX experts would probably disagree with me, but there's no wrong way to talk to people. There are ways that you can introduce the concept of sort of open-ended questions and just really getting to know people as a start, just like any other relationship, that makes this relatively easy to go out and do, but makes it seem very daunting. If you're new to this, I would recommend Adele Ravella's book on buyer personas. It's pretty short and has a lot of templates that can be really useful for you to blaze a trail and conduct user interviews, invite people, be the first one to set an example if this isn't something that your organization does. Somebody will correct you eventually if you are doing it wrong, I have noticed. It's Buyer Personas by Adele Ravella. Yeah. So leverage the people in your organization that know how to do this. If you don't, learn how to do it. And there's 4 additional surveys that we did to validate the work. So again, building in those steps where you know you're gonna have inspection points, where it's not just you saying, this is what I think our buyer personas can be, approaching it as a hypothesis and say, these are behaviors that we've observed, and this is a body of customer needs, frustrations, and things that we think we can address with our product, and not expecting it to never change. So when we talk about buy-in, these are the number of places that I tried to sort of crudely mark where we were able to actually give feedback. We would have weekly meetings to just kind of share out results of the group. And after we conducted interviews, started sharing insights early and often. And the benefit of doing this as much as we did and over the course of a quarter actually netted out really positively, where we were able to hire a user researcher and make the case for the investment in a user researcher that actually reports into PMM. So she does a mix of and customer research. It built stronger relationships basically throughout the company, and it allowed it to be safe for people to talk about customer needs and mess up. And sort of hold each other accountable to some of the things that we had learned. We have a clear product roadmap and positioning, and we have tighter conversations around customer data with the CX team, data, finance, and product. If you've done enough talking about it up until this point, the vocabulary just starts to emerge. And this is the really exciting part, and it can also be really scary. If you're a type A person, like I am, you start to see people using it, and you're like, oh my God, it's not done. Don't wait till it's perfect. It will never be perfect, and it's always going to change. You're facilitating a conversation with people. And when people get really excited about the conversation and it starts to run away and we feel that sort of loss of control, it's like sort of teaching a toddler how to talk. You know, you're not correcting a toddler's grammar necessarily. You're letting them kind of learn and understand while making tactful corrections. And that's sort of like an org learning to do something for the first time. They definitely have to crawl before they can walk. So let people mess up. Let people use things incorrectly. Encourage people to correct each other. Encourage people to do further research and give them the tools to do that. So rather being the person that knows everything about customers, being the person that knows how to help people talk to customers is a really key place for PMM to be. When you enable this mindset, you really give people a way of working that starts to become endemic in your org. So we have to give up the illusion that we sort of own the project and that there's an end date. So when we start to see the vocabulary forming, and we start to see people using the language, this really reduces conversation cycle times. So you, again, start having the depth of conversation right away because you're starting from a better point. When you say music producer and I say music producer, we actually mean the same thing because we have the same understanding. And it creates space for clarity. Clarity, as everybody in this room probably knows, is one of the #1 secret superpowers of a PMM, is providing clarity, helping people talk, facilitating really clean communication about basically anything that we do. That's part of what I love about this role, is that we just help people have better conversations about things and support them in doing really awesome product launches, messaging, building great products, whatever it is. And one of the best parts about this vocabulary that I find is if you've ever watched an internal expert talk to somebody who is in a function that doesn't understand what they do or doesn't understand the customer, it can be really painful. There's a huge gap there. And through this process, you can actually channel internal expert knowledge into something that is incredibly easy to understand for people. And that's sort of where your internal experts really shine. So that's like the superpower within your organization, is this thread line through of this expertise that gets continually validated by customer insight. And the work's never done. So I'm sure a lot of you know this, but language evolves, business needs evolve, and the market evolves. You're creating something that becomes part of your organization and grows with it. So it's more about enabling the mindset, enabling the behavior, and really taking it beyond marketing's personas. We're not talking about buyer personas, user persona, whatever you want to call them. It's you have a clean taxonomy for how you talk about customers, and you can share those insights across various different departments. And if you do this right, it feels like this ridiculous Pandora's box that opens. It's just one question after another, and it should really feel like it has this energy that cannot just be controlled by product marketing, and that's when you know you've just nailed it. So there's a few resources that I would highly recommend. I mentioned this book by Adele Rivella. It's got templates for user interviews, how to pull information together. Sometimes the hardest part about doing user interviews is what to do with the data after. You'll get a massive information, and trying to make sense of it all can be a really huge effort in itself. So pulling that together is something that she's an absolute expert at. And then I mentioned John Kotter's Leading Change. And then PMA has incredible resources on this. If you haven't checked these out, I highly recommend sort of sifting through their work on personas. There's a lot of great templates, as I'm sure we're all aware. And the customer segmentation course is excellent. If you're new to doing customer segments or how to track or pull customer segments out of the customer data that you have or the market data you have, that's a really a great time and dollar investment. So thank you for having me. This has been a blast. I'll stick around if anybody wants to talk about customer data.
Awesome. We have some time for some questions. What if you have decent segments that could be improved, but personas are a bigger gap? Would you still nail the segments first or focus on building personas?
That's a great question. I would start with your business strategy. So if your segments currently line up with your business strategy, you're probably in good shape to figure out what personas you want to pull out of those. They feed and inform each other. So I think in either case, you're probably going to be honing in on either one of them, but because it's iterative, if you have segments that you feel relatively confident with, doing the personas is not going to hurt.
Awesome. What are your favorite questions to ask when doing persona research?
What's wrong with our product? I think my favorite questions to ask are the things that people don't get to talk about a lot. I think potentially in a lot of our organizations, you have people that get kind of emotionally attached to the process of doing something versus your actual product. So rather focusing on that, focusing on the places where they get to actually be vulnerable with you. When people talk about music, it's sort of this wonderful thing that happens where people are just psyched to be asked about what they're working on. So I like to ask questions about motivation, inspiration, how to, the latest thing that they worked on make them feel, and kind of dig into those questions, because that's when you really get it's sort of like a more jobs-based interviewing or jobs to be done, if you're familiar with that, or really getting underneath what they're saying and getting into how they feel. And those are always really wonderful conversations.
Love that. What tool did you use, if any, to analyze all of that qualitative data?
Oh, Excel. um, yeah, I think Excel was a workhorse for this project, mainly because we don't have a robust user research function just yet. We also used Figma to map that coalition that came in. We did a really awesome integration session where we had taken all of the things that somebody had interviewed and all the takeaways that people had pulled from interviews, and used Figma to do a brain mapping session about the different buckets of things that we were looking. So, frustrations, pains, issues with the product, and kind of crowdsourced and pulled those in with citations about what interview it came from and or quotes. And that was really helpful. And again, that's where that team of people makes this a lot easier than what that project plan looks like. So I highly recommend doing that.
What's been the best way to enable sales on personas and get it to stick?
This is a really good question. The sales script is, I know it's sort of like the holy grail in the process, where if you can get sort of the persona information into the actual sales materials that they use and train on, that's been the way that I've successfully done that in the past. But getting at the start of it. And I think we had a good conversation earlier about just sort of pre-research before the sales team. So if you have sales automations or things that go out for lead gen, building in some of your research questions into that to kind of validate which bucket somebody might fall into will help validate it before it even gets to the sales team, so it starts to get embedded in the sales process.
I think this is the last question. With such a big project, how do you balance other parts of your job? What % of your time would you dedicate to a persona project?
Yeah, I would say over the course of that quarter, maybe about 30% of my time, depending on some weeks, it might have been closer to 50, which I know sounds like a lot. And I think the other folks on that team, maybe about 10 to 15% of their time, not for the whole quarter, but certainly for times where we were really pulling in all of the insight, or if we were doing certain weeks of interviewing. So. My team saved me on this. I have an amazing team of product marketers that report to me that I was able to delegate a lot of projects to during this time, and they were also able to support this work when I needed them. So definitely lean on your team especially if you have people that want to learn more about either personas or they're eager to take on new projects. It's a really good time to kind of make space for them to succeed as well.
Awesome. Well, big round of applause for Kim.
Thank you.